Hi guys, MrRoflWaffles here. This is a recap and explanation of the new Modern Warfare 2 storyline. The game starts on the 15th of July 2022, and before we get into location and specifics, let's just quickly talk about a few characters and their respective factions. So, the first person you need to meet is Simon Ghost Riley. He's one of the most prominent members of Task Force 141, which is a special ops group composed of elite soldiers from various different countries, but all the favorites are British. He's following orders here from Kate Laswell, partially, who works for the CIA, and primarily General Shepard, who's part of the United States Army. Also involved is a group called Shadow Company, who are private military contractors who technically aren't just US military, they're not US soldiers, but they still have elite training, and the fact that they're not official soldiers means that they can sometimes overstep and do things that the military wouldn't be able to get away with. The main Shadow Company member you need to be aware of for this game is Philip Graves, also known as Phil Graves for short. So why is Ghost in Al Mazrah? Well, he's trying to keep an eye on a guy called General Ghorbrani, who is an Iranian, and there's going to be some kind of rendezvous in Al Mazrah, but they don't know what it is just yet. However, when Ghorbrani flies in, Ghost sees that it's actually an arms deal. Russians are supplying arms to Iran. And so Ghost radios in, gives the coordinates, Shepard gives the all clear, and nearby, Graves takes control of a mobile ballistic missile, which is housed inside a shipping container, and manually flies the missile directly into the middle of the arms deal, killing everyone there, apart from Ghost, obviously. It is this killing of Ghorbrani that really stokes a lot of the geopolitical tensions of this game's campaign. And so even though in the game you only spend about 3 minutes on it, it's worth paying attention to the fact that these Western forces have just gone out of their way to kill a senior Iranian general, and that understandably is going to fuel a lot of bubbling Western hatred that might have already been present in the area. Several months later, we find out that exactly this has happened. Laswell meets up with Shepard, and they discuss the fact that Ghorbrani's second-in-command, a guy called Hassan Zyani, wants revenge for Ghorbrani's death. Zyani is a Quds Force major, and the Quds Force is a branch of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which functionally here acts like a combination of the CIA and a special forces unit. He's not really someone to be messed with, especially not in Iran, but Laswell's intel reveals that he's not actually in Iran right now, he's traveled to Al Mazrah. Intel suggests that there is a concentration of AQ fighters, that's Al-Qatala, which is a terrorist corps from Urzikstan, and those fighters seem to be protecting 3 different buildings there, so Hassan may well be inside. Shepard gives the all clear, and on the 28th of October 2022 at 1:30 AM, Soap McTavish and Ghost both arrive on the scene. Their plan is to fly half of their group into one side of the valley and half into the other, and then kind of sweep through and meet in the middle. So Soap, Ghost, and a few Marines get out on one side, but as the chopper's flying to the other side of the valley, it gets shot down. 5 soldiers are killed in action, 1's wounded, and 1 soldier, Corporal DeFields, is unhurt. So he hunkers down and tries to avoid getting shot while Soap and Ghost sweep the buildings. As they sweep, they see recordings of Hassan preaching his message, saying, "The West must pay for a century of hostile acts against us. Together we will avenge the death of General Ghorbrani, and if the world courts do not punish these war criminals, we will take matters into our own hands at the time and place of our choosing." It's very much meant to be framed as a situation where the US are the war criminals here, and the Iranians are just getting revenge for something that was done to them first. Having swept through the buildings but not found Hassan, the 141 members reach the crash site and defend it from oncoming AQ forces, including a bunch of armored trucks that turn up, and they then move forward and sweep the final building, finding it to be an ops center inside, and also finding Hassan's uniform, which confirms he was there previously, but he is no longer. Ghost turns to Soap here and says, "Choices have consequences," and Soap's a little taken aback, thinking that maybe Ghost thinks that they shouldn't have gone to rescue that 1 remaining soldier from the crash site, but it's not that deep, and they move past it and head over to a warehouse nearby that wasn't actually on their intel. They thought there were only 3 buildings, there are 4, and the fact that there are still AQ forces defending this position despite the fact that Hassan is gone makes them think that there must be something there. Inside, they find a shipping container. Sound familiar? And inside that, you guessed it, there's a ballistic missile. The controls for it are all in English, and there's a US flag stamped on the side. They radio back home to let Laswell and Shepard know, and instantly Shepard wants to know how many missiles there are and how they might be intended to be used. Now, Laswell's thinking about how they can get to the bottom of this mystery and suggests that the team on the ground do as much snooping as they can to, and I quote, find out everyone who's ever breathed on those missiles. But Shepard disagrees. He wants them destroyed ASAP, saying that he thinks there'll be too much enemy reinforcement in the area for them to just wait around there, and so he wants the missile toasted ASAP. But while he's giving that order, Laswell has an idea. Iran uses Amsterdam as a smuggling hub, and the US also has connections there. And so maybe they can get boots on the ground and use that to look for clues as to what might have gone on here. Laswell wants to make sure that the job gets done right, so she heads back into the field herself, which is permitted by Shepard, who asks her to keep this tight so that word doesn't get out that the US has literally lost some missiles. So later that day, on October 28th, Laswell taps in with Captain Price and Garrick, or Gaz, who are also both members of Task Force 141. Laswell and Price have a fair bit of history, and it made sense to contact them anyway, as they were already looking into a recent uptick in the area of extremist kind of chatter, and they happen to be also tracking Hassan, so it works in both their favors. Price and Gaz start their search in the harbor, looking for a boat that might contain a shipping container in case there are more missiles, or they can see how it was moved originally. They take out about a dozen Alcatraz guards who are all surrounding a barge in that area, and when they break into it and take out its occupants, they realize that those guards were from Las Almas, a Mexican narcotics cartel. Iran is clearly using the cartel and working with them for transport, but they're not transporting missiles in this barge, it's transporting something else. On one of the dead guards' phones, they see a text saying that the cartel are going to be meeting with Alcatala at 8 p.m. in Amsterdam, so that's where they head to next. For this, Price and Gaz split up. Price eavesdrops at a table nearby where the meeting is happening, while Laswell and Gaz take out a few guards in the area and cause a distraction. Price overhears that the Iranians are paying the cartel for transport of Major Hassan Zyani, and specifically, they're about to smuggle him into the US from Mexico. The group capture the cartel member that was going to be at the meeting, and Laswell says that she'll interrogate him, and she can be very persuasive, so they can try and learn more about how Hassan is planning to get into the US. And the following day, Laswell contacts another new character called Alejandro Vargas. Vargas is part of the Mexican Special Forces, and he's part of a specific regiment called the Cowboys, which in Spanish is Los Vaqueros. Laswell lets Vargas know exactly what's happening, and Vargas sets out with Sergeant Major Rodolfo Parra, who's essentially his right-hand man, to try and prevent Hassan from getting across the border. The cartel sends in immigrants to cross at the same time to distract local authorities, and unfortunately for Vargas, Hassan gets over the wall before he can be stopped. Vargas decides that despite the fact that he has no jurisdiction in the US, he's still gonna follow Hassan over, he just thinks it's important, so he does so and he brings Rodolfo with him. As they do this, they get stopped by local police, and while the police are talking to them and kind of being arseholes to be honest, they get hit with an RPG which kills all the police officers, but Rodolfo and Vargas both survive, and they continue on pushing towards the stash house where they suspect Hassan is hiding. They split up inside the house, and Rodolfo sweeps the top floor but gets knocked out by some of Hassan's men. And Hassan gloats for a minute when this happens, telling him that he isn't a terrorist, he's just a soldier, and he's here in the US to fight. Hassan tells his men to set the building on fire, and they leave Rodolfo to burn just like Gorbrani did. In Rudy's dying moments in the burning house, he radios across to Vargas to tell him what intel he can see pinned to the wall inside the room. A ship is delivering something across the Atlantic, but he can't tell what. At the last moment, Vargas bursts into the room and drags Rudy out, and both of them survive unscathed. Shortly afterwards, Mexican Special Forces confirm that Hassan is indeed moving something on ships toward the US, and it could well be missiles. The Americans decide that they need to capture Hassan to interrogate him, but he's fled back into cartel protection in Mexico, actually inside Las Almas. Because of this, they send Soap and Ghost in to meet up with Vargas and his vaqueros and ask them to capture Hassan together. To avoid starting a war, they task Graves, remember Graves from Shadow Company, with assisting, seeing as he has different rules of engagement to the US Army, and he can blur the lines a little bit for what would be acceptable for a foreign power to do and what wouldn't be. The group meets on the 30th of October, 2022. Vargas explains how Las Almas is very corrupt. If you resist that corruption, you disappear because much of the police are in support of the cartel, they're paid off by them, and much of the army are as well. Soldiers are well trained, so they're a perfect target to be hired by the cartel. But Vargas himself hasn't turned, and neither have his vaqueros, because he grew up in Las Almas and he loves it there. And as far as he's concerned, he'll die fighting for it. That doesn't mean that it isn't dangerous though, and Vargas specifically says that he keeps his family a secret and doesn't talk about them ever in order to protect them. Part of the reason for that is El Sin Nombre, the nameless leader of Las Almas, is everywhere. Nobody knows who he is, but the cartel has such a grip on daily life that you've just got to be extra vigilant. So, intel suggests that Hassan is being held in a building at the back of the town, and the cartel have cleared all the houses there and are just using it as a hideout. Soap and Ghost sweep through the village with the vaqueros and Vargas, but in the building that they think Hassan is inside, all they find is a Quds Force flag. That's clearly Hassan's own flag, so their intel was good, they just got there too late. At that moment, corrupt army troops drive in and engage the group, so they flee down a hill to try and extract at Soul River Bridge. When they get there, Graves gives them some air support from above and tells them that he might have spotted Hassan north of their position. So they reposition and sweep through a new cartel compound with Graves watching from above and covering with aerial firepower. This time, they are successful, and they capture Hassan from the building and successfully extract him. More cartel members try and stop them, but Graves fights them off, and this allows them to take Hassan to a remote location and interrogate him, with Graves also making the trip and being present at that interrogation. There's some back and forth in the conversation between Hassan, who's saying that he's not a terrorist, the US are the terrorists, and Graves just giving him some lip, but it's all interrupted by Soap, who asks Hassan who he got the missiles from, and that interruption is interrupted again by Shepard, who says he doesn't care who they got the missiles from, he cares about where they're going. Now that might seem a little suspicious, someone that high up in the US Army not caring about who sold US Army supplies to a foreign power, but it'll make sense a little later in the video why he's kind of cutting things off there. Now through the entire exchange, Hassan knows that what the Brits and the Americans are doing here is illegal. They definitely can't take him hostage, that would be an act of war, and Mexico isn't at war with Iran either, so he definitely isn't a prisoner of war, so they don't really have any grounds to keep him detained. Shepard at one point nearly gives the kill order because he's just getting annoyed, and probably because he's feeling a little bit sketched out by all this, but Laswell reminds him that that would definitely be an act of war, and so they let him go. Before they do so, they hack his phone and find out he was communicating with someone in Spain, so that is their next point of focus. Gaz and Price gilly up and head off to Spain to investigate the hatchery that Hassan was communicating with. Laswell also travels there and hangs around on a boat waiting to extract the pair. They have no jurisdiction in Spain, so this particular mission is completely off the books. As they push into the facility, they find out that the guards are not cartel members. This time, they're Russian. There are Russian crates which have all been recently unpacked, and there are clearly Russians that have been living there as well. As Laswell says, this is all getting a lot bigger. The plot is thickening. As they explore, they find a map indicating that there is a secret tunnel network underneath the lighthouse near the hatchery, and they find an entrance to those tunnels behind a washing machine. Pushing through the tunnel network, they find a moored submarine, which the cartel uses for smuggling, but they don't find any missiles. And as they come across that submarine, AQ forces capture Laswell from her boat, taking her as a hostage of their own. Price is infuriated by this, and even more so infuriated when Alcatala sent a message to him showing Laswell, proving that she is still alive and she's traveling to Urzikstan. The likelihood is they're taking her to Al Mazrah, they're gonna smuggle her underground somewhere, and she'll be disappeared for good. They'll never find her ever again. So Price obviously wants to get in there, send in the cavalry, and get her out ASAP. But Shepard suggests that he actually can't help here. It would take more planning and more preparation, and he isn't able to commit resources to that right now. But he also isn't going to stand in Price's way. So, Price and Gaz know what they have to do. They ship off to Urzikstan on the 1st of November, 2022. While traveling there, Gaz mentions that they might need an army for this one, like they're going up against the entire Al-Qatala force on pretty much home turf. But Price says, don't worry, I know someone, and he calls in a favor with his old friend Farah, who is the leader of the Urzikstan Liberation Force and a really prominent character in Modern Warfare 2019. Farah brings in her forces, and together they chase down the convoy that's transporting Laswell. As part of that, Garrick's chopper is hit with a missile and he survives on a rope, and then he commandeers a truck, and it's all pretty chaotic, but eventually they push forward, they corner the convoy, and they manage to get Laswell out. She is saved, and Farah's forces head home. When they have a moment of privacy, Price apologizes to Laswell, but she just says, knock it off, dude. She's found out that the missiles were never actually in Spain, it was just their guidance systems, which came from the Russians, and those systems are now on the missiles. Now, the only person, other than Hassan, who knows where the missiles are, is Sin Nombre. And so the team groups back up again, and they head to the house of one of Sin Nombre's lieutenants. Now, that might seem a little bit weird, but you'll remember that the cartel were trying to stop the temporary kidnapping of Hassan earlier on. It was obviously pretty bad for their reputation when they were meant to be protecting Hassan in Mexico, and 141 and Shadow Company still managed to get to him. So they're annoyed about the entire situation, and the meeting that's happening at this lieutenant's house is to try and figure out who it was that lit that fire under Las Almas that's causing all of this chaos. So, the team need to get into the house, but they don't have a ways in just yet. However, they quickly decide on a plan. They're going to send Soap in to offer up information to Las Almas and kind of use him as bait, and then they'll work from the inside out to try and figure out who Sin Nombre is and potentially get more information from them. To try and make Soap's bait even more believable, Graves rips off his Shadow Company patch and hands it to him as proof of his allegiance to Shadow Company, and with that done, Soap enters the compound. While he's doing that, Vargas on the side sneaks into the compound, kills a guard, and then uses the guard's outfit to disguise himself as a cartel member. This means that once Soap enters the building, Vargas is one of the cartel members that's leading him around. And so, Vargas drops Soap off with Diego, who's the lieutenant of the house, and he leads Soap to an interrogation room. In there is Valeria, one of Sin Nombre's sicarios, which is basically a hitman, and she's interrogating some other folks that are already inside the room. When Valeria questions him, Soap reveals the truth. Los Vaqueros are working with Shadow Company, this American group of PMCs, and they're looking for the missiles. He uses the patch from Graves to prove he's telling the truth, and Valeria decides that maybe she should head upstairs and talk to Sin Nombre to see if Soap deserves an audience with him. While she does that, Soap is brought to the ground floor to wait for her word. This is when Vargas re-enters the picture. He slips Soap a disguise, which lets him move around the facility undetected, and they sneak upstairs, with Soap killing Diego and taking his keycard. The pair then take the elevator up to the penthouse where Sin Nombre is, and they sneak a snake cam under the door to discover the identity of Sin Nombre is just Valeria, the woman that was interrogating Soap downstairs moments ago. With her identity figured out, Vargas and Soap bust the door down and capture Valeria with the help of Graves, who flies in a chopper. She's taken to a holding site inside a shipping container for interrogation. Vargas is furious about Valeria being Sin Nombre. They have history together. She used to be military. They served on different squads, but they were in the same unit together. And Vargas's squads were the rambunctious Vaqueros, whereas hers were just clean cut until the raid on a son of a guy called La Araña. Basically, Valeria's team were told to cordon off the city to keep La Araña's forces out and prevent bloodshed, but it turns out that she was La Araña's enforcers, and so she took La Araña to the mountains and killed him, and then she took over in the power vacuum that was left behind. Vargas hears all this, and he's disgusted. He says that she's a disgrace to the army and to her brothers. But Valeria thinks terrorism is good for business. As long as there's a war on terror, there'll be no real war on drugs. So she gets under Vargas's skin in a big way here, and she also knows that they need to keep her alive, so she uses that power. Graves says he wants the missiles, he wants the target, and he wants Hassan. But she responds by saying she doesn't know the targets as she's just a courier, and she'll happily tell him the missile location, singular, and then after they've dealt with all that, then she'll tell them where Hassan is. But they have to get the hell out of Las Almas afterwards. The group look at each other and agree. The deal is done, and she gives them the coordinates of an oil rig 400 miles offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. It's no longer active, and it's used by the cartel as a smuggling dead drop. The team scrambles and does some surveillance and finds that there is a large shipping boat nearby to that rig, and they've seen a shipping container being moved from the ship to the rig. They get to business, and on the 2nd of November 2022, they all travel to the rig itself. Fighting to the top, they find that the container is empty, and the missile controls that they were looking for are actually somewhere on the bridge of the ship, and the missile is already armed. They get onto the ship, fight their way through the bridge, and get to the controls, only to find that they can't actually disarm it. It's too late. Instead, they go with Plan B. They decide to detonate the missile by changing its target to the oil rig. The rig's evacuated first, and then they fire it at it, and the rig is destroyed. So is the missile. This might seem like a little bit of a victory, successfully preventing the missile from being used for any nefarious means. However, Vargas, Soap, and Ghost plan to return to base at Vargas's base. But when they get there, they find Graves already waiting for them there, and he tells them that they have to step away from the gate, which is a bit weird because it's Vargas's base, and he says, I don't take orders from you. But Graves goads him, saying, oh, you sound like Valeria when you say that, and I wonder what else you might not be telling me about your affiliation with a drug lord. Soap's also maddened by this and wants to call Shepard to ask what the hell's going on, but the orders came from Shepard himself. He has put Graves in command of the whole operation here. This makes Vargas's blood boil. He screams that his men are inside, but Graves reveals that actually his men have all been detained. And it's at this point that a fight breaks out. Vargas gets cuffed, and in the gunfight, Soap gets shot. In order to save himself, he has to jump down a slope at the side of the road and kind of disappears into the trees, and Ghost also manages to escape unharmed. So it's now midnight on November 3rd. Shadow Company, with Graves in control, have cordoned off the town and are sweeping through houses, murdering civilians who don't tell them where Hassan is hiding. In Graves' eyes, any civilian could be working with Las Almas, and the police especially are super suspect, so he pretty much just goes on a rampage, murdering them all. He's also on the lookout for the Brits, being very careful to tell his troops to keep their heads on a swivel for them, and while that's happening, Soap and Ghost establish radio contact. Ghost has managed to establish himself with a little sniper's nest in a church on the north side of the city, so Soap, who has no weapon and is wounded, has to sneak over and find him. After lots of sneaking around, the two meet and they find a vehicle that they can take to leave the city and travel to Alejandro's safe house with. And once they get there, having avoided the grasp of Shadow Company, they enter the safe house and they find Rodolfo, who shares the weapons that are in there with them, the ammo that's in there, and gives them new armored vehicles they can use as well. They form a plan. They know that Vargas and his vaqueros are being detained inside a maximum security prison, and their plan is to break them out. Pretty simple. They scramble to the prison ASAP, and Rodolfo mentions that he's known Vargas for 20 years, and he was always the toughest guy on his squad. They actually used to say, El único que puede matar a Alejandro es Alejandro, which basically means the only person that can kill Vargas is Vargas, because he's a tough son of a gun. So with that nice little thought lifting their spirits, they rappel into the prison and use the CCTV to sneak through the grounds and successfully free Vargas and his men from their cells. They arm themselves and fight back out of the prison again, and are met at the prison walls by Price and Garrick, who help them to exfil. How could they possibly have known, though, that they needed to be there to help with the exfil? Well, it turns out that they were tipped off by Laswell, who called Price and Gaz as soon as she heard that Shepard had gone dark. She did a little digging, she found the truth, and she let them know. And at this point in the game, there's a little flashback just to give you some more color as to what's actually going on here. On the 12th of August, 2022, that's 2 months prior to all of these events, a black bag operation took place in Al Mazrah, which was conducted by Shepard and carried out by Shadow Company. They were trying to sell American-made ballistic missiles to US allies who were fighting Russians in the Middle East, but it didn't go as planned. The shipment was spotted before it arrived at its destination, and it was ambushed by Russian private military contractors, PMCs. When his team were being attacked, Graves requested help from Shepard, but he simply replied saying, "You know I can't can't do that. And so the Russians killed the entire squad and took control of the 3 ballistic missiles. And they also took Shadow Company's comms. This allowed them to learn that Shepard was behind all of this, and as a result of that, they gave the missiles to Hassan because they knew that Hassan had a vendetta against the US. Shepard and Graves were obviously embarrassed by their massive, costly mistake, and their cover-up was worse than the crime. And that's why Shepard went dark and why he told Graves to take out Soap and Ghost. And it's also why earlier on he was saying he didn't care where the missiles came from, he just cared what they were going to be used for. He obviously was trying to cover the fact that the missiles came from him. So it was all a big blunder, and from Laswell's little truth-searching session, she also found out that there was one more missile, because there was a total of 3. Price and the rest of the team have a video call with Shepard and says that he might need fixing for what he's done because he's really messed things up here. And Shepard says, to do good, you've got to do some bad, man. But Price just disagrees with it flat out. Price also asks to have Graves called off, but Shepard really weirdly says, well, he's just a dog with a bone. And he recommends to Price not to try and take that bone away from him, which is wild because obviously Price's reaction here to say, well, I'm going to go for Graves then, and then I'm going to go for you afterwards, is totally justified. It seemed like there was a moment where Shepard might have been able to resolve things in a kind of sane, rational way, but instead, it's just everyone fighting everyone once again. So, Team 141 and Los Vaqueros unite. They are brothers in arms now, and their goal is to lay siege to the Fuerzas Especiales facility, which was Vargas's old base. They all don a new set of masks as Ghost Company, and at 4:30 p.m. on the 3rd of November, they attack. The team splits into 2 groups. Gaz, Vargas, Price, and a pilot fight through tunnels under the facility to get to the tarmac above ground and commandeer a helicopter, which Price will use with the pilot to blow open the doors for Ghost, Soap, Rudy, and Los Vaqueros. While they do that, Gaz and Vargas, who split up from Price once they got to the chopper, would go and find Valeria and lock her down. And most of this goes to plan, but Graves still slips through their fingers and climbs a wall into the Los Vaqueros training area. Just as this happens, Price's chopper is shot down, so Ghost goes to help Price, and Rodolfo and Soap are left to go into the Los Vaqueros training arena and fight against Graves, who at this point has hijacked a tank, so they just C4 him, and that's the end of Graves. On the other side of things, Gaz and Vargas successfully find Valeria still stuck inside her shipping container, and so once Graves has been taken out, everyone reconvenes, and Valeria reveals the final missile location to them. It's in Chicago. So that's obviously a pretty big deal, but they also made a deal with Valeria before, saying that they'd get the hell out of Las Almas if she told them what they needed to know. So she's led away, she says she'll be free in 24 hours, and it matters not what she did, but just what they can prove, and they can't prove a whole lot. So Valeria's pretty much getting out of this scot-free, but they've got bigger fish to fry right now because there's a missile in Chicago. It's been smuggled in via the port, and Hassan has been smuggled in as well. Local police know that there's a shipping container around, but they just think it's full of stolen weapons, and they don't actually realize that it's a missile. There's a specific building that they know is owned by a shell company run by Las Almas, and so Soap, Price, and a contingent of Marines land on top of that building. Meanwhile, Gaz and other Marines will push up from below, creating a pincer movement to hopefully trap Hassan in the middle. Soap and Price rappel into the building, fight through some forces, fight through the server room, but they don't find Hassan. They do, however, see the missile launch. It literally flies into the air with an unknown target, so they redouble their efforts. They've got to really move quickly now. Ghost, who is providing sniper overwatch from an opposite building, notices Hassan moving down the building, and so Soap and Price meet up with Gaz and continue to search the building for him. When they think they have him surrounded, they use a snake cam to try and see what's going on the other side of the door. As they do this, the door gets blown open, which stuns the entire team and wounds Price. Not fatally, but he still needs to take a minute. While that's happening, Hassan rushes out of the room and escapes down an elevator shaft. Time is really ticking here, so Soap chases after him, jumping into the elevator shaft, but the elevator shaft gets RPG'd, so Gaz can't follow and it's just Soap all on his own. He jumps down the remaining part of the shaft and lands on top of Hassan, knocking the missile controls out of his hands, and Soap grabs those controls and scurries off off onto a part of the floor that's focused on construction. There's lots of building materials, and he finds a place to hide. He opens the controls, radios into Laswell, and successfully remote detonates the missile. While he's doing this, though, Hassan is obviously looking for him, and he's eventually spotted and gets shot by Hassan. Luckily for Soap, Hassan runs out of ammo midway through shooting him, and so he decides to gloat a little bit while Soap is still alive and starts dragging him towards the window. This is the perfect opportunity for Ghost to get a clear sniper shot, and he takes Hassan out in one bullet. Soap is safe, and the missile explosion doesn't kill any civilians. Mission accomplished. Shortly after all this, when they've kind of got their breath and showered, etc., the group meets up in a bar with Laswell to just discuss what the hell's just happened. She says that Shepard is totally off the grid, but she's been doing more digging on the Russians and discovered that ultra-nationalists were the ones that were originally responsible for ambushing the missile convoy, and those ultra-nationalists are working with someone that she doesn't recognize. However, all the other 141 members do recognize him because it's none other than Makarov. And we then get launched straight in to clearly the new version of the original No Russian scene from Modern Warfare 2, except this time, instead of taking place in an airport, it's taking place on a plane. Makarov is one of the most prolific antagonists of the Modern Warfare franchise, so it makes sense that he would pop up here, and I'm sure we'll learn more about what his plans are for things in potential story DLC for Modern Warfare 2, as well as in story development from the Spec Ops mode and from Warzone 2. If you want to learn how the story progresses as the years go on, then subscribe to my channel, and I'll keep you updated as things progress. Cheers, thanks for watching, drop a like if you've enjoyed, bye-bye.